Congratulations. If you've made it this far in this course, you've officially went over all of the basics that you need to know to actually go out, use Trello, create your boards, customize them, assign various tasks, create subtasks, communicate in Asana, add attachments, and much, much more. We've covered a lot very, very quickly. And if all you're looking to do is to create a Trello board and to use it for your work or your personal productivity, at this point, you've got all of the information that you need to go out there and do that. In this video, I'm going to start to switch gears a little bit, and I'm going to go over more of the theory, best practices, mistakes to avoid, and more that you should know if you're looking to use Kanban in the long term and from more of an intermediate point of view. So this part of this course or this part of this section, it's completely optional. If you want, you can go ahead and skip to the next video where I show you a real world example of how I personally use a Kanban board in order to manage the social media for my business. But if you want to learn more about Kanban boards, you want to learn more about what makes Trello boards so powerful and how you can utilize them to the maximum capacity from a standpoint of more theory, then stay in this video. And really, there's one thing I wanted to mention that I didn't really talk too much about earlier in this course. When we talk about Kanban boards and Trello, we're talking about two very similar things. Trello is a project management tool or a task management tool, and Kanban boards are the primary view that Trello uses in order to visualize work. So Kanban boards are essentially the boards that you see within Trello. Kanban boards are not confined to just Trello though. You could create, for example, a physical Kanban board. This is an example that I used for a previous course. You could see here we have our to-do column and we have our in progress column and we also have our done column. It might be a little bit hard to see that, but you can create a physical Kanban board or you can have a virtual or digital Kanban board, which, for example, is what we created within Trello and what I showed you exactly how to do in this course. But additionally, many other different types of software offer that board view or the ability to create Kanban boards. For example, Asana offers it, ClickUp offers it, Monday offers it. We have many different courses on all of these different types of project management tools. And all that to say is Trello uses Kanban boards as the default style of view because it's so effective, it's so simple to get started with, and it provides a very easy way to visually display workflow. But even in Trello, you can use different types of views. For example, you can completely change the view of Trello to look completely different than a board view. You can show a list view of your tasks. You could show a calendar view of your tasks. But Trello is primarily known for its Kanban board style of showing that visual display of your tasks within a board view. So with that, let's get into some of the different important parts of Kanban boards that you can utilize for Trello. So three main concepts of Kanban here that are important to know is Kanban boards are used to visualize our work. They're also commonly used to limit work in progress, which we'll talk about in just a minute. And finally, Kanban boards are often used with the assumption that you're going to improve continuously as you use those boards. We're going to talk about each of these three concepts a little bit more. You're already very, very familiar with the first one by now because you can see through using Trello, through using our Trello boards or Kanban boards in Trello, we're already visualizing our work as well as our workflow. So we won't cover that too much. But let me show you the work in progress here with a Kanban board example. So you already know exactly what columns are in Trello. They call them lists. It's these different areas up here that identify where work is currently sitting. And we also have our cards or tasks, which you already know about. But I want to talk about the work in progress or work in progress limit. And this is assigned to the in progress part of your Kanban board or the in progress column. Now, many people and many different types of people working with Kanban boards will choose to set a work in progress limit. It's very, very simple. All the work in progress limit is it caps the max amount of work that is currently in progress at any given time. For example, this work in progress limit here is 4, meaning we can only work on 4 tasks at a time. So we can only take 4 tasks from the backlog or the to-do, drag them into the in progress, and actually work on them at any given moment in the project. You can see here in this Kanban board example, we currently have 3 different cards or tasks in the in progress column or in Trello, the in progress list. But the main thing you have to understand is if we went up to 4, we would not be able to add any more tasks because the work in progress limit here is 4. And it's excellent for ensuring that we're not taking on too much workload at once, and we're ensuring that we're handling all of the possible tasks that we can based on specific factors. Depending on what you're working on, who you're working with, you may or may not have a work in progress limit, and it might be under 4 or more than 4 if you're actually using a work in progress limit. So like everything with Kanban boards, you can go ahead and customize them depending on how you need to use them and what your specific board actually needs. Quickly here, I'm going to go through when you should use Kanban boards. So Kanban boards tend to work well with very general task tracking. So when you have simple tasks that move from a backlog or to do to in progress to done, generally very simple tasks are great for Kanban board for that visual style of working. Same thing with general business operations. General business operations like your day-to-day, your week-to-week, very, very simple to set up recurring tasks within Trello or with Kanban and start working on repeating tasks and operations very quickly. Same thing if you're an individual or you're on a team that likes a very visual display as well as workflow. If you like seeing that visual display that Kanban boards offer, well, they're great to use. Many marketing organizations, departments, and anyone in marketing often like to use Kanban boards as well. Software development is super similar. Software development occurs in a very linear fashion, so it's very, very often used with Kanban boards. One thing with software development, though, they tend to have quite a few different columns. Earlier in the course, I showed you an example of a Kanban board template, and before we removed some of the lists and the views, or some of the lists and the columns rather, in Trello, that template was actually used for software development. So software development might have 6 or 7 columns, which is quite a bit more than our basic Kanban board. Additionally, anything with personal productivity and projects that has a very simple flow of work is also really, really great for Kanban board or for Trello boards, because really you can add 3 or 4 columns or lists, get started right away, and keep things super, super simple and track your work very, very easily. Additionally, Kanban boards are great if you're willing to have multiple boards for different initiatives, projects, different types of operations, and more. Let's talk about when you shouldn't use Kanban boards or when you shouldn't use Trello boards in general. So Kanban boards or boards in general, they don't work well with complex projects with many different types of task dependencies. For example, if you have a very large project with 100 or 2 or 300 different tasks, and each of these tasks must be done in a specific sequence, well, it's probably not a good idea to use a specific Kanban board for that specific project. The reason why is because Kanban does not handle task dependencies well. So for example, let's say that you're working on a very complex construction project. You would have to build everything in logical order for each task. So for example, in order to actually work on the lighting in a building, well, the foundation for the building would obviously have to be poured in place. Same thing with the framing of the building and the electrical for the building. You couldn't possibly work on the lighting in the building until you have all of those different dependencies or previous tasks actually done, working, and in place. So Kanban doesn't necessarily always lend itself to working well if you're working with complex projects that require other different tasks to be completed in order for a specific task to be able to start. While it is technically possible, it's not ideal. And I kind of covered this just now, but if you're working on a huge project with, again, 100, 2, 3, 4, 500 tasks, Kanban is definitely not the best way to handle it. You'd be better off with something like a calendar view, a list view, or something that gives you a better overall high level overview of all of your tasks versus using something like a Kanban board. Additionally, projects with multiple departments that have different workflows is usually not a good use case for Kanban, because with Kanban boards, you want to start separating out different types of projects and initiatives. So it wouldn't really make sense to have, let's say, a general Kanban board for the IT department, the marketing department, the sales department, the HR department, and more to work within one specific board. Now, if you're willing to make multiple boards for each project or initiative or department, well, Kanban could be a good choice. But if you're trying to create one project or one board or work with one project with one board, from multiple different departments that have completely different tasks and initiatives, workflows, and different types of deliverables, then Kanban board probably isn't your best bet. A huge thing for the next and last factor here when not to use Kanban boards is that you shouldn't use Kanban boards very similarly to what I just talked about if you're looking to use one Kanban board for everything. One of the important things for Kanban boards and for Trello boards in general is you have to separate out your initiatives. Sometimes you might need 5 or 10 different Kanban boards where you might not want to go out and actually create all those Kanban boards. It's time consuming. It's a lot of hassle to manage them. And sometimes it just doesn't make sense. And some people try and shove everything into one Kanban board when oftentimes it just doesn't work and it just doesn't make logical business sense. So keep all these factors in mind when you're working with Kanban boards to understand that you shouldn't use them within these specific use cases. Let's go over some Kanban best practices now. So one of the first best practices is to obviously name our columns. You might call your columns lists or sections. Specifically, as we've went over within Trello, we call our columns lists. Within Asana, if you're using like Asana for Kanban board management, you might call them sections. But generally, for the most part, I just refer to them as columns no matter what program or software that I'm using. It keeps things simple, and you're going to want to make sure that you name each of your columns. So for example, you have your to-do column, you have your in progress column, and you have your done column. Whatever you have to name your columns, just make sure that you actually name them and everyone understands what each of the name means. Same thing with cards or tasks. No matter what tasks you're creating, make sure that they have a specific name that identifies what needs to be done in order to complete that task and what it was even created for in the first place. The third best practice is to use color coding, and we showed that through the use of Trello by adding labels. If you remember earlier in the section, we added a graphic design label to one of our tasks. You can create a bunch of different labels. That's one of the easiest ways to add color coding. Unfortunately, to actually add color coding to the various columns or the various lists within Trello, you have to have a premium subscription. But to color code actual tasks, all you need to do is add labels, which you do not need, as of right now, a premium subscription for. The fourth practice here is not necessarily as important for us when we're just starting out with Trello boards or Kanban boards, but you can add priority labeling. So if you want to label your tasks with a label of like extremely important, important, high priority, medium priority, low priority, you could do that as well instead of labeling with them the type of task it is. Like instead of graphic design or coding tasks, you could add a label with a priority list, like I just mentioned. Another good Kanban best practice is to add owner assignments to each of your tasks. So every task or every card you have on your board should have a proper owner assigned to it. Make sure that no task is added to the board or moving throughout the board without having a proper owner. Additionally, we've already talked about work in progress limits. If you need to add these for your board, make sure that you discuss with your team what limit you're adding. For example, 3 or 4 or 5 work in progress tasks. That way, no one goes over that set limit. The seventh best practice is to use a team board review. You can do this weekly and just review the board with your team, ensuring that work is being completed as expected, that no tasks or cards are oddly placed or not being worked on properly, that the specific columns that you have are actually still relevant for your either your project or your operations or whatever it is, and that you're ensuring that overall the board looks satisfactory to everyone who is using it. The eighth best practice is to limit your columns. I talked about this a little bit earlier, but you want to make sure that you don't have too many columns, and you want to make sure too that you have enough columns. So generally the best range is about 3 columns to 7 columns. You shouldn't extend past 7 columns, and really you shouldn't go below 3 columns because you're always going to need at least 3 columns like a backlog or a to do, an in progress, and a done. Additionally, if you're going over 7 columns, you might want to consider using a different type of view besides a Kanban board or besides a board view. Use something like maybe like a list view or a calendar view, because once you start extending past 7 columns, Kanban or Trello boards start becoming very, very difficult to manage. Same thing with refining your columns. Make sure that you're refining your columns weekly, usually during like a weekly team board review that I just talked about is the best time to continuously refine your columns and just make sure that you have the proper amount of columns as well as the proper column names for your specific projects, tasks, or your specific board. Lastly, I wanted to talk about common Kanban board mistakes and how you can avoid them. So the first one here is unclear ownership of tasks. So this is when people don't realize who is supposed to be working on what. And the easiest way to avoid this is by making sure every single task or every single card that is being added to your board is properly assigned to the right person and they understand exactly what work they should be working on because it's assigned directly to them. Second, the board not being updated frequently. So you might have someone who has a bunch of backlog tasks and they start working on them, but they don't move them from the backlog to the in progress. Or they might be working on them, but they finish them and they haven't marked them as complete and moved them to the done. So make sure that whoever is using your board understands that they need to be updating work and updating tasks and cards in real time as things are actually progressing. Really, that leads us into our next mistake, and that's the board not being used by your entire team. If your board is not being used, well, people aren't going to understand what's being worked on, what's not being worked on, what should be in the backlog, what's in progress. It creates a lot of confusion and it causes a lot of problems. So make sure that everyone understands that everyone who's on the board and on the team that's using the board needs to be using the board non-negotiable. The fourth Kanban mistake is having too many tasks in progress, and the easiest way to limit this is by using a work in progress limit, as we talked about earlier in this video. The fifth and final mistake that you'll see on boards is having too many columns. We just talked about this. The ideal amount of columns is between 3 to 7 in length. If you have more than 7, you probably shouldn't be using Kanban, and you should either reduce the amount of columns you have, or you should look at another type of view, specifically like a calendar or a list view.